Welcome back, everybody, to the Kentucky History Podcast. I'm your host, Jameson Cable, and I'm here with second-time guest, Robert Khane, Louisville resident.
Yeah,
How's it going?
Very good. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Very happy to be joining for the second time. It is very good. It's talking about one of my favorite subjects, of which I'm not really an expert, but I do my best to talk to be as knowledgeable as I can about the history of Louisville and Jefferson County, because it is my town. It's my city. It's where I was born. It's where I live now. I've spent the vast majority of my life, all but about 6 years of it here. So, I guess I should know something about it because I've been here so much. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we're going to be talking about Jefferson County's history today, kind of going by county by county, and going from county to county, looking at different counties' history. And I kind of figured, I'm in the middle of central Kentucky, South Central, if you want to get a little more specific. It might be good to get somebody from Jefferson County to kind of talk about this a little bit more than me, because I can read the history books, but I'm not going to know the streets or the locations in Jefferson County.
The context, for sure. And I think it's different a little bit too. I mean, I don't want to intimate at all that there's nothing going on in a lot of the smaller counties in Kentucky, because that's not true. There's a lot that goes on there, and there's a deep history in all 120 counties in the state. But there's probably more going on in Louisville and Jefferson County. I don't think anybody's going to argue that. And so, it's a bigger than a one-person job. And I think whenever we're talking about, what we're going to be talking about, I wouldn't even qualify this as like hitting the highlights. This is like the short summarization. Because it's big. There's, I would say like 20% of people who've ever lived in Kentucky lived in Louisville, lived in Jefferson.
Yeah.
So we get 20% of the episodes. I think that's how that works.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, there probably could be definitely Jefferson County part 1, part 2, part 3. Then, I mean, there's going to be Louisville part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 parts if you want to get into all the different events that happened or occurred.
There probably should be a Louisville history podcast. And we do have a good amount of experts, people who've written lots of books about Louisville, people who, I live, the part of town where I live, the Metro Council member, and prior to that, the alderman from this area was a historian, and is one of the foremost historians of Louisville. He doesn't get out too much anymore, but I've learned a lot from him, and a lot of other people have too. He used to ride his bike around and talk about the history of Louisville and all the different statues and different things and different stuff that people needed to know about. There's lots of other folks that write about it too. There's lots of books, enough that we have definitely not gotten to even the majority of them. So
yeah. Well, we talked the first time you were on. You were talking about the Jefferson County, Louisville Metro merge, and all that. You talk about all the different cities within the county that people just don't even know about. I mean, and we'll get into we may get into some of those today. I don't know, but like Jeffersontown and some of the others, people don't even realize that there's a city that's in Jefferson County that's not Louisville, or what's it called, a
municipality.
Municipality. There you go.
Yeah. Well, yeah, J-Town or Jeffersontown, as you just called it, but the locals call it J-Town, and St. Matthews are two of the biggest cities in the state of Kentucky. I think they're in the top 25 in terms of their size. And those operate as their own cities. They have their own police departments, they have their own fire departments, they have their own social services, they have their own city council people, they have, everything you have in a city, you've got in those two places, and many others across the city. Those are the two biggest. Shively, I think, is up there as well. But there's others in the city that have all those own sort of services inside of Louisville, and in addition have all of the Louisville Metro services as well. This isn't a politics show, but if you listen to my show, I will get into every once in a while how it's kind of silly that we have all these redundant services. But that's neither here nor there for this podcast. Yeah,
that's a podcast for another day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess we can get into it and graze the surface of Jefferson County's vast, deep history. Obviously, people have been in and around Louisville, Jefferson County for thousands of years. We have little information on those people. A lot of archaeologists digging up stuff like that, and I do have. We are working on. This is just a side note for the podcast in general, but we are working on getting somebody on the show, an archaeologist, to kind of come on and talk about those sorts of things, because that's stuff I don't know as much about. I would love to know more about, and it definitely connects to Kentucky history. But anyway, so you have the mound builders, you have Native Americans as well. Most of the tribes you would probably run into would be like Shawnee, Wyandot, Chickasaw, Cherokee. I'm sure they came out this far as well, Delaware. And I'm gonna mess up on some of these names, but Massapequa, I think, and Yuchi.
Your guess is as good as mine in terms of the pronunciation of these names. But yeah, no, this history is really important, and just like any other place in the world, the further back you go, the more difficult it is to understand or know much about the history, especially given the lack of respect a lot of times that these cultures are given in the way that we study American history. But it's true everywhere that if you go further back, there's less information. Mm-hmm. And it is, when I think a lot of times when we think about like Native history, we typically think of like what the situation was at the point of Western contact. Yeah. And really that isn't the history. It goes way further back, and different people groups and tribes are trading stuff back and forth. And Louisville, of course, we'll get into it, was founded because of the Falls of the Ohio, predated Western contact, so the people who were dealing with the Ohio River definitely had to deal with the Falls of the Ohio prior to white people showing up. So they had their own way of dealing with it. So wherever Louisville was, definitely had something going on there. And there is like a couple of maps I've seen that Louisville kind of divides territory, because probably that's as far as they went. Our boats can't get any further than here. I guess we're going to stop. That's kind of how it worked out, probably.
Yeah, if Native Americans, if they were going down the Ohio River and they wanted to keep going, they had to get off the river. Mm-hmm. And that is another risk, getting off the river and possibly being attacked or something else could happen.
You didn't have to.
You didn't have to.
You could try to run it. And there's a long history. There's some really good stories. The man who wrote, there's a book called The Short History, I think, of Portland, Kentucky. And that is, Portland is another one of the, I don't really know their status. I don't know if they're technically a city anymore, but it was a city for a long time along the river in Louisville. It's James Higdon, who also wrote Cornbread Mafia. But he has written in that book about Portland, there's several anecdotes about people running the river, people who are historically good at it. But yes, you didn't necessarily have to stop. But it was very dangerous for you not to, and it was a very big skill. Of course, taking your boat off the river, putting it into a warehouse, rebuilding it on the other side of the falls, that was a big deal. That was a very difficult thing to do. And if you could run it successfully, you'd save a ton of time and a ton of money, but you risk losing everything. So that's there's lots of good stories there.
Risk and reward, man. Risk
Absolutely.
And reward. So that kind of gets us up to the big I guess European settlements, or the connection, and basically, the Falls of Ohio created Louisville. We kind of talked about that. The waterfall, well, it's not a waterfall, I guess.
Nobody living has really seen it because, of course, we've dealt with it now, and there's tons of shipping that goes through the Ohio River now, and so I don't know. I guess it could have been kind of a waterfall, a rapid, something that went on. It was like a weird fall in the river. So that no boats could pass.
Yeah, and it would be pretty cool to see, because the Ohio River is a big river. Mm-hmm. I always think of the first fall that comes to my mind is Cumberland Falls, and it's really cool, but it's not the biggest river in the world. To think of the Ohio having a waterfall would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't think it was quite the size of Cumberland Falls. No moon bows coming off of the Falls of the Ohio, but it was there. It was bad enough that the boats had to deal with it. But like we said, it was big enough that you could go over it if you were good at doing that. And
then some whitewater rafting.
Yeah, in a steamboat, right? Which is a way that happened a lot of the time. So yeah.
But all right, so if we're gonna credit, George Rogers Clark gets pretty much most of the credit that I'm aware of settling or establishing what would become Louisville. Now, he called it, or it was named, a place called Corn Island, which is pretty unusual bit of a name. But right off the top of your head, why do you think anybody would name it Corn Island?
There's only one guess I could make, and that's that they grew corn there.
That is a very good guess. I would guess that as well. And before we get into that, it was for a brief time, it was named Dunmore's Island after some explorers who had come earlier for Lord Dunmore. But that's another story. We won't sit on that too long. But George Rogers Clark, when he gets there, he changes it over. Him and his crew change it to Corn Island, and it's basically Clark and his men, and a group of settlers come. But Clark, of course, leaves and goes up north and does all his battling and those sorts of things. And but the other settlers stayed, and they eventually moved to the mainland of Louisville. But if we're thinking about the Corn Island name, there's two things to consider. They grew corn, and that's very important to agriculture and sustaining their environment or living. But there's also a second one that George Rogers Clark named it Corn Island to mislead Native Americans from it being a military post. So they would think it's just a civilian settlement. It's not a military post. So we'll just leave them alone. They're just growing the corn, man. That's all they're doing.
It's like an Iceland Greenland situation where we're trying to keep people away from the good stuff. Make it so that nobody knows that we actually have a battalion and weapons and stuff here, right?
I think that actually probably makes the most sense. But anyway, so the people there, though, they move over to, they don't stay on the island long, and the island is gone now. I would assume you can't even see it, or it's been washed away. They move over to the mainland and eventually form what will become Louisville. After all this happens, or more people start to come, but Virginia decides to approve the first 3 counties of Kentucky out of Kentucky County in 1780 in May. And that includes that includes Jefferson, Lincoln, and Fayette County. And as it is Virginia, and as a revolution is going on at the moment, they decide to name Jefferson County after old Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to me. So it's 1780, they named it. I never really thought about the timeline here, but that was before Thomas Jefferson was the president, right? He was just like some Virginian who'd been involved in, the Revolution and had been, of course, wrote the Declaration of Independence and had been very much involved in the independence movement and helped to found America, helped to be a part of the Constitutional Convention and everything. But yeah, he had yet to be president. So the thing that we probably know him best for at this point had not yet even happened when he was named, when Jefferson County, Kentucky was named for him.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about Lincoln and Fayette, they're both named after generals.
Right. Yeah. People sometimes say Lincoln County is named for Abraham Lincoln, but that was like 100 years later, right?
Yeah.
Way off.
Way off. But an interesting thing, so they name it Jefferson County after Thomas Jefferson. But one of the funniest things is the citizens that are in Louisville are kind of upset about all this because the county seat is all the way in Harrisburg, which, if you understand or if you know where these places are, it's about 100 miles away, or it's a very long way away.
Yeah, Harrisburg there's a fort there, so I've been there. I don't know. That's kind of wild to me that used to be the county seat, because that was a pretty small town. It still remains a pretty small town. Like I said, like going there, cool fort. Went there when I was a kid. But yeah, Louisville had a lot more going on. So I don't know why they didn't make that the county seat. But yes, if I had been allowed back then, I would have been upset too.
Yeah, well, a little background, I guess, for that reason. So Louisville, so Lincoln, Jefferson, and Fayette are all named. So I think originally Lincoln, the county seat was Harrisburg, but then it changed over to Stanford really, really quickly there. So I was kind of baffled because I don't know if they redrew the lines maybe and threw Harrisburg into Jefferson County, but then on the other side you have Fayette County, and I don't know right off the county seat for Fayette County when it was first formed. But anyway, if you think about Boonsboro, Fort Logan, and Fort Harrod, you kind of had these 3 central forts that were kind of big players in the early settlement.
And I guess it makes sense to put your town in a place where there's a big fort and a lot of military kind of outpost, and Louisville was more of at that point probably was more of a civilian area with more business and shipping and stuff like that was going on there.
Well, the more stations, and that's the next thing I was going to bring up, that in 1780 they had 7 stations, which a station is basically a small fort, And I would think Fort Herod was probably one of the bigger forts, protection wise. They kind of probably went with that for that reason. But you had a few stations, and some of these may ring a bell. You had Spring Station, Hoglands Station, Floyd Station, Low Dutch or New Highland Station, Asturgis Station, Lynn Station, and Sullivan Station. Any of those ring a bell?
Yeah, well, so all of these ring a bell in some form or fashion. Like a lot of them are streets. Like there's a big Spring Street, and close to downtown Louisville, there used to be a really great restaurant with great wings that was on Spring Street Bar and Grill. So that I don't know, maybe that's where it got its name. Floyd, I mean that's a big name. There's Floyd County, Indiana, is right across the river from Louisville. So I don't know. That could be what's going there. That could have been the same Floyd. Yeah. Of course, New Highland, the Highlands in Louisville. That's actually where I live. But the way that works is, you get away from the river and you go up. Obviously the river's as low as you can get, and as you go up, the Highlands are the furthest point or the higher point away from the river. So when actually it's kind of confusing because of course the river is in the north part of the city. The upper Highlands is the highest elevation, which is actually the southern part of the Highlands, which is confusing when you're looking at north and south on a map. You'd think the upper Highlands is north, but it's not. It's actually south. So I don't know. That could be the same sort of Highland type situation. Lynn's, another great restaurant called Lynn's Paradise Cafe. But I think it's named for a person. I don't think that's the same thing. But there's also there's a Lynn's Station Road. That's it. That's got to be it.
That's got to be it. Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where Lynn Station was, but Lynn Station Road is definitely, there's a Kroger there. I'm trying to think about other things that are in that area. But yeah, that's like way out in terms of Louisville. That is like at the I'm people say, I don't want to say it's way out because people who are from Louisville, when you get to the middle of the city, you think like out in the county is like very. Yeah. It's not that far away. Yeah. It's kind of close to the Watterson Expressway. If you know where that is, Louisville. Yeah. It's right off the. I actually think there's a Lynn Station Road exit. If not, it's like the Plant Side Drive. It's actually pretty close to where I work, like the Oxmoor, Hurstbourne, kind of close to J-Town area. So that's that's where that's got to be. Yeah, Lynn Station Road. That's got to be what that was. And then let me see other ones. Sullivan. Yeah, I don't know about Sullivan. That's a very popular name for lots of things too.
Yeah.
I guess it's Irish, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. O'Sullivan is a name.
Well,
but yeah, there's lots of Sullivan stuff. I don't know where Sullivan Station would have been though.
Well, yeah. I would love, and I'm sure somebody, maybe the Filson people or somebody has a map of like all these stations and
there's no doubt about it. That exists somewhere. And we can pinpoint and see what these things were all named for. Should have probably done that before we started, but
that's all right, man. It just gives us another episode to come back on here and talk about where they are.
So these stations were they're like military outposts or like small outposts, or is that what these were?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they are even military outposts at all. These are just like people settling in. They have a station that's kind of a small fort. They live inside that fort. And they probably grow crops some inside the fort if it's a big enough one. Most likely they probably grow them outside because it's hard to explain without having like a picture in front of me. So sure. You've been to Fort Herod.
Yeah,
it's probably one of the bigger forts, and you could probably house 50 to maybe even, I don't want to be too 50 to maybe 75 people in those forts. As opposed to these stations are going to be a lot smaller. Like Fort Logan is a lot smaller. It's almost a station. It's not that big at all. It at max is going to hold like 50 people. So you have all these stations here around in the Jefferson County area, and mainly they're relying on each other. They're able to warn people of an attack here, an attack there, protect people that are living outside the forts. But mostly that takes a little bit of time. That kind of moves us a little farther down the road of our story here. Louisville is founded and becomes the seat of justice for Jefferson County. So people aren't having to drive walk and ride their horses to the courthouse and all that. But it's named after Louis the or King Louis the 16th of France.
There's a big statue of him, or there was. In some of the unrest that happened in the past year, his hand got cut off. But he was kind of a jerk anyway, right? Like, I guess he got the name because he was the king of France when they founded it. But yeah, he's not really remembered as like a great king of France. Like, they could have picked some better ones.
Yeah, and I think afterwards, like pretty soon after this, like he gets overthrown and all that stuff. In comes Napoleon. That's for the French history podcast. I don't know as much about all that.
Yeah, right.
The forts were kind of the prominent early settlement. People stayed in those. But then as obviously they were close to Ohio River, Native American attacks and raids and so forth. But once they started to decrease, that's when people more came out of the forts and began, you'd have their little station here, but then you'd have, the Johnsons, cabin and land. And it kind of people began to spread out that way. They found salt springs in some areas called Manslick and Bullets Lick. And people began to move south down the Salt River.
Yeah, so Manslick is definitely a road. There's a Manslick Road in Louisville that it starts in Shively. It goes by Iroquois Park, if you know where that is.
Yeah.
And it goes kind of south. So I don't know where the actual Manslick was, but that did get a name. That's a road. And then Bullitt, I'm going to assume probably was associated with Bullitt County, which is the county directly south of Jefferson currently. So that's probably where those things came from.
And as those things go, more stations, of course, pop up. You had Mud Garrison Station, Dowdale Station, Fort Nonsense, which I think is kind of unusual.
That's where I would have lived. That's where they would have put me. Yeah.
I would like to know where that name came from. And then also Brashear Station.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, maybe somebody out there knows if that's connection to Governor. I know they're from farther western Kentucky, but
Yeah, they're from like Dawson Springs. I do know some Brashears. There was a guest on our podcast named Ivy Brashear who's from eastern Kentucky. So I don't know, that's probably a family in Kentucky as well. So yeah, Brashear.
Yeah.
They're different. Yeah.
They're close there. But salt making. So salt making was Jefferson County's first industry. And I guess it was probably a pretty good industry. A lot of people there. People need their salt, big commodity in those times.
We did a lot of warehousing too, but I think I think salt was the industry because we actually produced it and sent it to other places. A lot of people worked in the warehousing industry, but that wasn't actually creating anything, right? You were just like stopping the boat, putting the boat into a warehouse, and then rebuilding it on the other side of the falls. So even though a lot of people work there, I think it probably doesn't necessarily qualify as an industry, even though you have to pay for it. It's just like shipping. It's like, So. Yeah, but I didn't know that. We're known for our salt. I guess that's something good to know about our town. I like to cook with salt, so
it makes things good. So in 1784, Nelson County though was formed out of Jefferson County, and from then on, Jefferson County just begins to shrink. 28 counties were made from Jefferson County, which is a lot.
Which is kind of interesting. So Kentucky has 120 counties, obviously. So if we started with 3 and only 28 came from Jefferson, that seems like a lot, but that means that the other 2 had to have a whole lot more. Fayette and Lincoln must have had like almost 50 each.
Lincoln is known as the mother of all Kentucky counties because it had the most come out. But if you think about, have you ever seen a map of the first 3 counties? You have Jefferson, Fayette, and then Lincoln. And then, but Lincoln basically covers all of like Western Kentucky. Like I would say Bullitt and maybe in Nelson, you get a few there below Louisville, but then Lincoln is all the rest of that. Okay. And that's kind of.
So that's where a lot of the counties came from, Lincoln. And then Fayette, like the way I understand is Jefferson kind of goes pretty far east, basically to where Fayette is now almost, right? I think, but Fayette has most of northern Kentucky and like the Covington area up to where Cincinnati is. But yes, so that makes sense. We got 28 counties, which seems like a lot, but pales in comparison to Lincoln County. Yeah.
Oh, stinking Lincoln, man.
Yeah, there you
go. So of course, Louisville being on Ohio, we've talked about this. It begins to grow rapidly. Some of the early settlers, were wealthy people from Virginia. I'm going to throw some of these names out here. You got Richard Taylor, who was the father of President Zachary Taylor. Richard Clough Anderson, who is the big Anderson family. I don't know too much about him. I've read a few books, done a few videos on Richard and his son, Richard Jr. Yeah, I don't know as much about him as I probably need to. Alexander Scott Bullitt and William Croghan.
Okay.
And he's the brother-in-law of George Rogers Clark. So that are some famous or some early important settlers.
Yeah, Zachary Taylor, he's buried in Louisville.
Mm-hmm.
So Zachary Taylor's grave is here. He's probably the only he is the only president that's buried in Kentucky, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And but he's not that famous because he wasn't very good as president and also really wasn't that good as a person, I don't think. So we don't talk about him too much, but he is buried there. He was a general. I don't remember which war it was.
War of 18. He actually. So he was at War of 1812, and he fought in numerous wars actually. So he, like if you add up his time, he was not really in Kentucky a lot because he was up in the north. Right. He was down in New Orleans in the south. I guess he's done a lot of stuff, war stuff. But for the most part, his base was in Louisville, and then eventually, though, he didn't, I think, move south.
Yeah, I think he's kind of more closely associated with Louisiana, I believe.
Yeah.
And then, but yeah, of course, a family grave, I guess, being there, and it's in Cave Hill Cemetery, which is another very, very important spot to Louisville.
Loads of people.
Tons and tons of people buried there in Cave Hill Cemetery. And the Highlands, that's another interesting thing about the Highlands. They started settling it, and people thought that they were crazy to go past the cemetery. And of course now, it was Louisville's first suburb outside of town. And that was the big thing, was to pass the cemetery. So that's kind of how you're in the Highlands, when you get past Cave Hill Cemetery.
Yep, there you go. So I'm sure you're probably going to get some these places might. I bring these up specifically because we've talked about Bloody Monday and so forth. But in 1797, some German immigrants settle.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham Brunner, And so Brunerstown, is that a place now in Louisville?
Never heard of Brunerstown. But, if it's probably, there's a Germantown. So the big area in Germantown is Schnitzelberg. I think that's named for food. I would assume that it's probably around there, Brunerstown.
Well, another one was Middletown, and it was founded by Philip Buckner.
Middletown is where I grew up. I grew up in Middletown, and that's another one of those small cities that we mentioned, but it has a pretty substantial history, dating back to the 1790s, and it's called Middletown because it's halfway between Louisville and Shelbyville.
Cool.
And at least that's the legend that I was told as a child. It's there are a lot of small towns in Kentucky. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this know their own small town, and in Middletown, it looks and feels a lot like a small town anywhere else in the state. It just is inside of Jefferson County, so it misses out on that. There's a really cute downtown, little shops, same sort of development story that a lot of the downtowns and small towns across the state see, where it's we're trying to showcase this, we're trying to keep the history there, we're trying to get people to open shops. And the same sort of struggles where things will go in and go out all the time. And, it's the same story that you see everywhere. It's just because it's in the middle of Jefferson County, it gets ignored a lot of the time. That's where I grew up. And the other thing about it too, that's probably a similar story to a lot of other small towns in Kentucky, is there's this really nice downtown street that everybody used to go down. And then they have Shelbyville Road, which is a huge, US 60, where that's where all the commerce is now. There's the big Shelbyville Road exit when you first get into Jefferson County off of 64 is right there in Middletown. So that's where all the restaurants and the Walmart and Kroger and Target are all right there. And then they have off to the side the cute little downtown that they're trying to get people to shop at, which I think that's also probably a story that a lot of small towns across the state probably are from. That's Middletown.
Very familiar. That's the story you hear. So that's kind of the basic part of, let's say, Jefferson County. want to thank Robert again for coming on to the Kentucky History Podcast. And that wraps up part 1 of our talk about Jefferson County. We'll be back with part 2 coming soon. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.